Assalamu alaikum, good evening, dear excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's such a pleasure and honor to have participated in a very important forum, full of deep insights with remarkable visions presented by most of our speakers on some of our most important issues that the world is getting to grips with these days. And my role today is to offer some contributions on another important topic, and that is Afghanistan, which is not only affecting the lives of Afghans, but also our region, and by extension, the international community. I know I must start with thanking the ICD for convening this important forum, and also its excellent colleagues for the hospitality and such effective arrangements. But I must also acknowledge that this is probably the toughest time for anybody at this time of the day to deal with yet another tough topic like Afghanistan. But I make a promise that if we do a good job with this, there will be plenty of drinks and fresh air outside waiting for you. The topic that I was supposed to talk about, colleagues, is basically a question. Is it a dead end, or do we have any hope that Afghanistan could be put on a track, on a path to peace, legitimate governance, and democracy, where the rights, the fundamental rights and freedoms of its people, especially its women and minorities, are protected? The answer to that is yes, ladies and gentlemen. But as we heard a lot from our speakers today, it will depend enormously on the determination, goodwill, leadership, and courage of not only Afghan leaders, but also our international partners. Why do we share that responsibility together? Let me try to make 3 quick points as to why it is important that that responsibility is shared. First, we need to make an acknowledgement that the fall and the failure of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan was a catastrophe, not only for Afghan people, but also for the region and the international community by extension. And it was a shared responsibility. It followed 2 decades of shared sacrifices by the Afghans and our international partners. But when the partners failed to maintain their consensus, the disaster happened. The Taliban did not succeed militarily. We failed together politically. Now, that disaster either triggered or exacerbated a set of crises, a number of crises that are interlinked and have serious consequences for both Afghanistan and the international community. First, it's the humanitarian crisis. Over 90% of the Afghans are faced with chronic food insecurity. It is bad so because a state, a functioning state, was disrupted, its services and its responsibilities. Second, the economic collapse is making people even poorer because key economic institutions collapsed, the international community disconnected Afghanistan, and Afghanistan is not able to trade effectively with the outside world. And that exacerbates the humanitarian situation even further. Third, it's the human rights and women's rights crisis. The draconian policies of the Taliban, which have nothing to do with Islam or Afghan values, but it's basically Afghanistan conquered by a wave of barbarian groups of people that may speak the Afghan language but do not represent the Afghan vision, values, and principles. That brings me to the fourth crisis, and that is security. That by harboring transnational networks of terror, despite Taliban's international obligations, they are turning Afghanistan again into a sanctuary for international terrorism. These terrorists are there in Afghanistan not for any charitable work or purpose. They are there to harm other people from Afghanistan. And it's not just that. It's also the work of transnational networks of crime, especially supporting the world's largest drug economy. Now, these four crises are even exacerbated by the fifth one, which is the political legitimacy or lack of political legitimacy of the authorities in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is not able to address any of these crises on its own. It needs national and international cooperation. And the Taliban's control of the government is illegitimate, and illegitimacy of that authority prevents national and international cooperation. Therefore, the four critical threats are imminent. I hate to engage in politics of fear, but it's also responsible to be realistic about what may be coming our way. First, it is the security threat posed by transnational networks of terror. Second, the security threat plus denial of basic rights and freedom will exacerbate a humanitarian situation that would lead to massive population movement, producing again a caseload of, or probably the world's largest caseload of refugees, ending at the doorsteps of Europe. I spoke about drugs, but it's not just drugs. It's transnational networks of organized crime specializing in weapons, contraband, and more seriously in human trafficking. Now, one question that we are often faced with is, who did that to Afghanistan? Who is responsible? good prediction. I would put them into three categories of actors. First, the Afghan state and political leaders, who, because of their selfishness, corruption, and disunity, failed to protect the Islamic Republic. Second, the Taliban leaders, who undermined every effort for peacemaking. And third, our international partners, who, because of a premature decision of withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan, based on a wrong-headed peace agreement between the United States and the Taliban, actually allowed the Taliban to take advantage of a collapsing state. In this, colleagues, the Afghans call for accountability and justice. And it shouldn't be just Afghans, because lots of nations send their young men and women in uniform and civilians to achieve the goal of peace, democracy, and human rights, women's empowerment in Afghanistan. They made sacrifice together with us. All of them have the right to demand accountability and justice. I belong to a group of Afghan politicians who are proposing three things for this process. First, there must be an international mechanism to investigate into what has happened. That investigation should hold these leaders accountable. We can take advantage of two very important international instruments. One is the UN Convention Against Corruption, and the second is the International Criminal Court. Luckily, Afghanistan is a state party to both. And a third measure is in fact an appeal to the partner nations, their representative bodies, to hold their own investigation. Why is this going to be important? That we can at least share the burden and responsibility. My second point, to put Afghanistan on that path to peace and democracy, we need a political settlement. If you look at the Afghans and some of our international partners, their views across a spectrum fall into two critical categories, or rather three. First, there are those who believe that Taliban are a reality, and we must live with them. We must accept them. They are wrong. This will not produce peace or stability. Any nation that is deprived of its basic rights and freedom, it will never have peace. Second extreme view is to fight the Taliban to the end and use of force. They're equally wrong, in our opinion, because we've done exactly that over the past 2 decades. We fought the Taliban, not only Afghans, but over 14 nations together. Did it get that result? There's a third school of thought to which we belong, and that is a principled political settlement through intra-Afghan negotiation. That settlement must pursue two twin goals. Goal one, everlasting peace and security for both Afghans and our international community. And goal two is legitimate governance. I deliberately chose legitimacy as the key word in this respect. For us and for any civilized nation, legitimacy comes from the free will of the citizens, men and women alike, and the commitment of a state to uphold their basic rights and freedom to maintain its legitimacy. The Taliban and the non-Taliban Afghans, let me put it, the Republican Afghans, with all due respect to the Democrats, must get into intra-Afghan negotiation to achieve that goal. Is there any legal framework for that intra-Afghan peace negotiation? Ladies and gentlemen, luckily there is. As much as we hate that peace agreement, it does provide, the Doha Peace Agreement, a framework. There are 4 interlinked obligations in that agreement: counterterrorism, departure of foreign troops, intra-Afghan negotiations, and a new state in Afghanistan that upholds the basic rights of the Afghan people. That agreement was endorsed by the UN Security Council, Resolution 2513. As I understand it, it's binding, not only on the 2 parties, but on UN member nations. There's time now to implement that peace agreement fully and seriously. So far, the agreement was implemented only selectively in terms of the departure of foreign troops, but the other 3 key obligations have been ignored. There is this idea that on the basis of this agreement, the world community might benefit from holding a second Bonn conference facilitated by the United Nations. The intra-Afghan negotiation can happen. That brings me to my last point. What is the role of the international community and our regional partners in this process? Their consensus is key to the success of achieving an intra-Afghan political settlement and having it fully implemented. Who are these partners? First, the United States, who is a party to that agreement. Second, the UN Security Council. Third, the EU. And then we have regional actors. At least 4 of Afghan neighbors: China, Pakistan, Iran, and Uzbekistan, plus other key regional actors such as Russia, India, Turkey, UAE, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. why the hell are so many of these actors involved in Afghanistan? Because they have interests in Afghanistan. It's not that we are inviting them to care for us. We're inviting them to take care of our mutual common interests. They have interests, so do the Afghans. The first expectation we have from these international actors is to maintain their consensus on key interests, such as counterterrorism, legitimate governance in Afghanistan, and removing the reasons that sustain an outflow of the population from Afghanistan. One question that is asked every time we raise this issue with our international partners is, will the Taliban be ready? Will they accept to come to the table to negotiate? The answer is no, if we do not generate enough national and international pressure on them. So number one, to generate that national and international pressure on them is the power of that legal agreement, the Doha Peace Agreement. Interesting to know that this is probably the only agreement ever in the history of Taliban that they have signed. So we need to hold them accountable by the obligations in that agreement. Second, the Taliban continue to expect from the international community recognition for their government, lifting of sanctions, international aid, and access to Afghanistan's reserve. All of these issues must be linked to a successful intra-Afghan peace negotiation and achieving a political settlement. Third, there is already a good news that the national and international pressure is showing some early signs of success. At least 2 out of 3 deputies of the Taliban's top leader are now publicly criticizing their boss for the wrong policies, especially its draconian policies on women's work and education. And there are more Taliban leaders that are joining these two. So we must continue. Finally, something that is very important, and I'm glad that we have Excellency Prime Minister Hassan here and other leaders, that we need solidarity from the Muslim world in one important aspect of this international campaign, and that is to prove that the Taliban interpretation of Islam is absolutely wrong. And here we need international Muslim scholars, from Al-Azhar to International Muslim League to every Muslim nation. They should jointly and systematically challenge the Taliban's interpretation, so that those who fight for the Taliban's leaders' wrong interpretation of Sharia understand that they are wrong and they are fighting the wrong war on their own people. The Taliban are extremely sensitive to this. They may not be afraid of B-52 as much as they are afraid of international Muslim scholars questioning their perceptions and understanding. Finally, the international community will have to respond positively to one basic expectations of the Afghan politicians, to create safe space for them to come together. One of them made an excellent point, that the international community was able to provide an office for the Taliban for over a decade in Qatar, but not able to provide such an office for Afghan Democrats who are fighting for peace, democracy, and human rights. So that is something we need to get to grips with as quickly as possible. While we are working on the political settlement, we should not forget that the three pressing priorities, responding to human rights, women's rights, and humanitarian situation in Afghanistan. The work on that should continue. It should never be stopped for any reason. With this, Mark, I turn it back to you. Thank you for giving me the space to offer these insights.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid I have to be the real bad cop today, given that we are running half an hour late. I would appreciate if you keep your questions for the informal part of today, if that's okay with you. You're going to be ready with dinner and gonna be like questioned a lot.
I would be even fine with no questions.
Because there's also, yes, I am seeing that, but as I said, I have to be the bad cop. There's also an art exhibition, and they're waiting already for half an hour for us. So there's an artist that opened an exhibition, so I'm afraid I have to cut it here, given that it's half an hour late. And the plan is, you can do that informally later. I'm sorry, I have to cut you off. Like, somebody has to be the bad cop, it's me, so throw some tomatoes, it's okay. I can live with it. Let's not throw food though. So you can ask him. I'm thank you for this very nice speech. You will be there for the questions, but let's all get up and let's applause. Then